Hello and welcome and Happy New Year. I think it's probably a bit late to say Happy New Year now, but welcome and really nice to see you again, Gretchen. I can't believe is it almost a year ago now we did our last one.
Yes, I was thinking about that just the other day. It doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but
No,
man, how time flies.
yeah, amazing. And it's all very much still the same, isn't it, for everybody? Things
Yeah.
haven't changed sadly at this period. Anyway, so today we are going to talk about exercise to improve mobility, which I think is so important for everybody for whatever reason. Either for some people who have permanent issues of mobility, or some people who have got temporary issues of mobility. At the end of the day, it's all the same. We've all got to try and keep moving, haven't we? Really, really important. We are talking this month, we're running a clinic on arthritis, and I know that what we're going to touch upon is also look at people who have either rheumatoid arthritis, osteoarthritis, neuro issues. All of these people are absolutely embraced and included in your mobility. What's the word I'm thinking? Oh goodness, it's off to a great start. What you're going to tell us, or advise to people, it does cover people who have all of these conditions as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's such a broad spectrum because even just diseases aside, even just with the pandemic, people are moving less. But then you add a disease on it, any type of disease, and usually that also promotes less movement and less exercise. So there's definitely some tips and strategies that we're going to talk about regardless of what the diagnosis is.
So Gretchen, would you like to just introduce yourself? I know that a lot of people on here today will already know who you are, but if you'd like to introduce who you are and what you specialize in would be great.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Gretchen Hawley. I'm a physical therapist and a multiple sclerosis certified specialist. So I've been a PT for about 8 years now, and I started specializing in MS about 6 years ago. So most of my career so far has been in MS, but in doing that, I have been getting a lot of referrals over the last several years from neurologists who have clients with other conditions. So Parkinson's, rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia, and there's specific exercises and specific parameters of how you should be doing those exercises to get the most out of it, because it's not just a cookie cutter situation where you go to physiotherapy or even a gym and a personal trainer and you get the same exercises. There's different ways to do it that's more manageable without causing fatigue or extra soreness that has you knocked out for a day or two or three afterwards. So that's what I specialize in. It's my passion to educate on this, because if you don't know these things, oftentimes you don't exercise. So my goal is to get everyone moving.
And I think that's the hard bit, isn't it? There is always that fear, how much should I do before I'm doing damage?
Yes.
And you kind of hope that your body pulls you back naturally by saying, oh, that doesn't feel quite good. But you do know sometimes you should be pushing a bit harder.
Yeah, it's tricky because sometimes you can tell in the moment that you're overdoing it. You'll be exercising and you feel like, oh, I better slow down, or, oh, that doesn't feel comfortable. And that's a great sign, because then okay, let me pause for a second here. Let me take a break, or let me just cut my session short right now. However, sometimes, and for a lot of people, you don't feel that way during, you just feel that way afterwards. So you've done this whole exercise program and you're feeling great and confident. And then the next day, or even the same day, just a few hours later, your body is telling you, woof, that was just way too much. You overdid it. Here's some fatigue. Here's some soreness. Here's some pain. And that's the type that's trickier, because in that situation, the best way to move forward is to write down, if you didn't already, exactly what you did during that training session or during that exercise routine that you did. Which exercises, how many sets or repetitions of each one? Did you take rest breaks? And there's no judgment there, but just write down what you did. And then the next time that you exercise, do less. So maybe you exercised for an hour or even just 30 minutes, but the next time, maybe you back off by 5, 10, 15 minutes and see, okay, how did you feel that time? Or if you did a total of 30 repetitions for each exercise, maybe next time you do 20 and then analyze. So it's a little bit slower process because it takes time to figure out what works for your body. And each day might be a little bit different, but it's a little bit trickier. But that's the strategy that I often would suggest implementing.
Okay, so we obviously had a chat beforehand to say what we're going to discuss, and one of the things we're going to say, and it sounds, and you suggested it, is to say what exercise is.
Yeah.
And I said, we will just say exercise, and everybody's definition of what exercise is actually very different, isn't it?
It is. And, I do webinars like this pretty often. And I like to ask in the chat too, what do you think when you think of the word exercise? What do you think of? And usually what people say is running or jogging, squats, jumping jacks, lunges, like all of these exercises that we do in gym class when we're younger. And, as you grow up, if you're part of a sports team at all, those are the types of things that you do. And so we have this idea that exercise means specific exercises, or exercise means dripping in sweat or running. And that's just not the case. Exercise is anything that has movement. And I think it's so important to understand that. I'll share this story. I have a Missing Link member who was talking to me one time, and in the Missing Link, we have this program that says week 1, day 1, these are the exercises you do. Week 1, day 2, these are the exercises. So we were chatting about it, and she said, Dr. Gretchen, I am so bummed. I didn't get to any of my exercise days this week. My daughter had COVID. She was staying upstairs. I was constantly going up the stairs to give her breakfast, lunch, and dinner and tissues and all these things. And therefore, I was just so tired. I didn't get to any of my exercises. And I asked her, I was like, well, how many times do you think you went up those stairs in one day? And she said, oh my gosh, at least 15 times. It's like, that's exercise. That is movement. Do you know what it requires to go up the stairs? I'm sure some of these people on here do. It requires marching. It requires you use your hip flexors, your knee flexors, your ankle muscles, your core, your arms. That is exercise. And it's so important to understand that, because many movements that we do throughout the day, I consider to be exercise. Another word, if you're not understanding that, forget the word exercise and replace it with physical activity, or replace it with movement. Any type of movement, in my opinion, counts as exercise. Getting dressed, showering, going to get the mail, walking around your home with or without stairs. So I think reframing what exercise is can also make it feel more doable for you, which is so important. Because if it doesn't feel doable, you're just going to chalk it up to something that you can't do, that you're not meant for.
Absolutely. And let's just see what I've written. And then the next thing we were talking about with exercise is how to modify it. And I suppose, first of all, we shouldn't, I think doing everyday exercise, like going upstairs, is in many ways is more valuable than doing a class where you're stepping. Because when you're doing general exercise, you use far more parts of your body than one specific bit if you're in the gym, don't you?
Yeah. And, one thing that I come across a lot in the physical therapy world is people are doing exercises, whatever that might be, at the gym, at home, whatever. And they'll feel like, well, I'm getting stronger. I can tell whether I physically see more muscle or I just feel stronger, but my walking's not any better. But I'm still having pain with going up and down the stairs, but it's still really hard to get in and out of my car. And I think there's a big difference between general strengthening and functional strengthening. If you're the type of person that has ever said, hey, I'm getting stronger, but X, Y, and Z is still hard for me, what that tells me is you're doing a good job strengthening and exercising, but you're not doing functional exercise, because functional exercise is what will make your functions, also known as your day-to-day activities, easier. And you can absolutely do both. It doesn't have to be one or the other, but with either of them, modifying is so important. If something's too challenging, that doesn't mean that you can't strengthen that muscle group because it's too weak. Just you can change the position. The positions most often that you can exercise in are standing, sitting, lying on your back, lying on your side, or lying on your stomach. So there's not necessarily one that's hardest compared to the other ones or easiest compared to the other ones. It's different for every body, and it's also different for every muscle group. So a lot of people assume standing might be the hardest because you have to be standing. But for some people, standing is actually easier because your joints are in a different position, your muscles are in a different position standing versus sitting. So whichever exercise you're doing, and I can demonstrate if that's helpful, but you can change the position to modify it so that it's easiest. And the reason that's important, and this is something we should talk about anyways, the reason that's important is because the easier it is, the more repetitions you can do, the more opportunities your brain has to find a neural pathway that works, that can make that muscle group stronger. A lot of people think if it's easier, they're taking the easy way out or they're cheating, but that's not true. You want it to be easy, at least at first, to get those neural pathways firing.
And the other thing is, you don't want to have an excuse not to do it.
Right.
Isn't it? So it's very easy to say, oh, it's too difficult, I can't do it, or it hurts, it doesn't feel right, I won't do it at all. So, I mean, if you can demonstrate, I think that would be a really good idea for people to understand what you mean. It's the same exercise, but you've just modified how you've done it to suit your body.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll show you one of my all-time favorite exercises. Let me just back up here. Okay. So let me move it down a little bit. So this is going to be one of my favorite exercises for walking. So in order to walk, one thing that we need to do is lift our leg up. You can't walk forward if you can't lift your leg up like that. So one of my favorite exercises, you can hold on to something, is marching. So you're standing up like this. So this is one position that you can exercise in, and it's just a marching exercise. Another option, if that felt too challenging, I'll show you from this side, we can do it seated. So you're at the edge of your chair. This is the same exercise. You're just sitting down instead of standing. Or if that's too challenging, you can recline back. This is the same exercise. You're just sitting and reclined backwards. And what's important here, the reason this feels different than this, as I mentioned earlier, it's purely based on the position of your joints and your muscles. So if I'm sitting like this, I'm at about a 90-degree angle or so here. That can be, with the hip flexors, it's easier to lift them if they start off in a straighter position. So this is less of or technically a bigger angle, so that can be easier. And this, you're starting off with them fully straight. So sometimes standing is easiest. So those are 2 ways or 3 ways. However, if that doesn't work for you, I'm just going to get on the ground and show you some others. If that doesn't work for you, you can also do it on your back. This is the same exercise. You can also do it on your side. You can do one leg at a time or both legs. So these are all the same exercises. For each one of these, I was lifting my knee up towards the ceiling, or actually not in all of those. In all of those exercises, I was lifting my knee up towards my chin, regardless of what position I was in. So sometimes I give that exercise to people in standing, if that works well for them. Other times I give it to them lying on their back or seated. So just know that there's many different positions for every exercise. And if it's an important exercise like that one, you need your hip flexors to walk. You need your hip flexors to climb stairs. You need your hip flexors to get out of the car, to get out of bed, and into the shower. So that's a really important one. And you can tweak it to what works for your body. And also remember, today, maybe standing is easiest. Tomorrow, maybe you're lying on your back. The next day, maybe you're sitting reclined. It doesn't always have to be the same. Just listen to what feels good to your body.
And I think we were also talking about if you're mobile enough and you go to classes, that you should always, first of all, tell the instructor if you've got a problem. And if they're a good instructor, they will know how to modify that exercise for you.
Absolutely. Because, that what we just talked about is just modifying the position, but you can also modify how high you're lifting. Maybe instead of aiming to lift as high as you can, you're just aiming to lift a few inches, or it's a longer hold or less of a hold, fewer repetitions. Instead of doing 10, maybe you do 5. So there's lots of different ways to modify, repetitions, holds, height, and position.
It's funny, isn't it? When you start talking about it, you suddenly realize you can expand how to modify it, what it means in so many different ways.
Yeah. I was just talking to someone yesterday. He had been doing one of our exercises for, I think he said about a year. So he's been doing it for a while. He's like, it's too easy now. What should I do? And he was doing this exercise sitting down. And so I said, well, you can try to stand up, see if that's any more challenging, or do more repetitions. And he was like, no, I can already do like 100 repetitions. I was like, okay, so you've tried that one. You can hold longer. So when you lift the body part, ankle, knee, hip, whatever it is, instead of just holding for maybe 1 or 2 seconds, can you hold for 5 seconds or even 10 at a longer pause? And so he was doing those things. And then I had said too, implement it into your day. So this exercise that we were talking about with him, he was lifting his ankle up and down. It's a really important one if you have foot drop. So if you pretend this is my knee, this is my heel, and these are my toes. Foot drop is, when your foot falls down. So, and a great exercise is do the opposite movement. Practice lifting your ankle up and down, up and down, up and down. So that's what he was doing. And I had said, well, if that's getting to be too easy, practice it while you're walking. So be extremely intentional with every step that you take. Focus on lifting your ankle. Because what he was noticing was he's getting stronger there, but he still has foot drop while walking. So implementing it into your day is another thing that you can do to see the functional benefits.
And I think with foot drop, isn't it? That you can get that for various reasons. And somebody I know had it because they had a growth removed. So the nerves were cut, and it was all about trying to get the nerves to connect and lengthening everything. And so she did so many exercises, like she was told to do it all the time. And it makes exercise made her better.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
So for sure. Okay, so what exercises would you recommend that everybody does? Well, not everybody, but majority of people every day. What's a core set of exercises that most people would benefit from?
Well, yeah, this is a great question. So there's a few things. Number one, and I think this is really interesting information. Research shows that doing cardio exercise first before you do anything else primes your brain for neuroplasticity. So it gets your brain ready to strengthen your neural pathways that already exist or to find a new neural pathway. If you have MS or any other type of demyelinating disease, your neural pathway, meaning the pathway from your brain down to the muscle that you're trying to strengthen, might not be working. So neuroplasticity is the ability of your brain to strengthen the one that does work or find a new one if it's not working. So doing cardio first primes your brain for that, which is amazing. Now, cardio does not need to mean running or the Stairmaster or even walking for that matter. I do cardio for my clients seated and we just move our arms, or, punching, arm swing. So there's lots of things that you can do for cardio without incorporating your legs. So cardio first is what I typically suggest. And then we've got strengthening, stretching, and balance as the three main categories. So for strengthening, it really depends on what your goals are. For example, I'm going to back up and demonstrate again. So if you're someone who is looking to improve your walking in any way, shape, or form, if you're currently not walking and you want to walk in general, or you're currently walking, but you want to be able to walk a longer distance or walk with better quality or have it not be so fatiguing, then what I'm about to demonstrate will be helpful. So, or even running too, but okay. So when you walk, what you first need to do is shift your body weight forward. Then you need to bend your knee. Then if you look at my ankle, you got to swoop your toes up, then bring your knee up towards the ceiling, straighten your knee, put your heel down. And all while that was happening, I was standing on one leg. So that's 7 different things. So when you're picking which strengthening exercises to do, it's important that you're taking your goals into consideration. So that's 7 exercises that you can do if you're working on walking, if that's one of your biggest goals. And what you would do is for each of those 7 movements, do that as an exercise, either standing or sitting or lying on your back, as we demonstrated earlier. So that would be strengthening. Balance is another big one. You can balance on 2 legs with your feet together or apart or staggered or single leg balance. You can include some weight shifting side to side. And then stretching is the other really big one, because if you have tight muscles, that can prevent your strength that you're gaining from doing what it should. So I like to do seated stretches because when you're sitting down, you don't have to worry about balance. So you can just fully relax into this stretch. Sometimes when you're standing, all the time when you're standing, you use more muscles. And so it's harder to isolate the muscle that you're stretching. So those are the main categories that I include for my clients. And it's all based around what your goals are. So before you start anything, I would suggest prioritizing 1 to 3 goals that you're working towards. And that will be a really great way to tell you which exercises you should be doing.
It's interesting, isn't it, watching how you walk? Who would have thought it was so complicated?
Yeah.
It's amazing how we take our bodies totally for granted. We take balance for granted. Mm-hmm. And then when it doesn't work, you suddenly feel a bit like that. You think, wow, what,
yeah,
it makes you really re-examine.
Yeah. And a lot of people, most people, I would say, think walking is just one movement. Like they'll say, all the time, I'll ask my clients, well, what's your biggest goal? And they'll just say, well, I want to walk better. And I'll say, okay, well, what about your walking? Is it the lifting of your leg? Is it the bending of your knee? Is it the balance? Is it how far you're walking? And sometimes they'll say, well, it's all of it. But other times they'll say, oh no, it's definitely the balance piece of it. Or it's definitely the lifting of my legs or my foot drop. So break it down, even something as simple, and I don't mean easy, but even something as simple as standing up from a low surface. If you have difficulty standing up from the toilet, a bench, a couch, like a low squishy surface, standing up is not just one swift movement. You need to be in the proper alignment, which requires having the strength and flexibility to scoot forward, to open your legs a little bit wider, because the wider they are, the more balanced you'll be, to bend and straighten your knees, to shift your body weight forward. So for any goal you have, break it down. Nothing is ever just one movement. It's always a series of movements. And that series is what you can do as your strengthening program or a stretching program.
I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned walking. So presumably that's one of the key things for people is to concentrate, if they can, on walking.
Yeah. And I would say that's always my first example, because most of the clients that I work with are looking to improve their walking in some way, shape, or form. And I can totally understand why. Walking is a great form of mobility and socialization. Even if it's just talking about walking into a restaurant or, walking to a place, not just walking around the block or going for a walk with friends or family. Walking can be a big isolating factor if you're unable to do it. So in a lot of people's minds, staying functional with walking will allow you to keep living your current lifestyle.
Absolutely. And I mean, now it's amazing, isn't it? It's the first thing when you're in hospital is they want you to get up out of the bed, whereas beforehand to stay in bed all the time, and how things have changed. But I suppose, it's just as important for people who are unable to walk. It's still very important to do that strengthening exercise for as much of your body you can.
Absolutely. And walking, there's so many benefits to walking. Of course, the strengthening, the stretching, and everything we're talking about, but just the act of walking or even just standing pumps your muscles. Anytime you are using your muscles, it acts as a pumping system where it squeezes the muscles and relax, squeeze, relax. That gets the fluid in our body, our blood flow flowing. And so if you're in bed for a long time, that's when you might notice some swelling because the blood flow and the fluids in us aren't going anywhere. There's no pumping action. So walking is a great way to increase circulation, increase the blood flow, everything throughout our body, and activate the muscles at the same time. So it's a really great action. One of my favorite exercises is purely just standing with good posture. Standing up tall uses all of the muscles in our body. If you're not tipping in any one direction when you're standing, that means that you're using all the muscles on the front side of your body, the back side, the right side, and the left side. If you weren't, you'd be tipping towards one of the directions. So people don't often think of standing as an exercise, but it's one of my favorites.
Although having said that, nowadays, they highlight those work at a desk, standing at a desk, isn't it? Yeah. So I suppose there's more awareness of how important standing is if you can stand, obviously.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people associate the standing desks with having better posture. If you're sitting, you're more likely theoretically to slouch down like this, whereas if you're standing, you're up tall. And that is the case. Sometimes standing does promote good posture, but you can still stand and slouch. I think we all do that. So any form of standing, if you're standing at a desk, if you're standing in line, standing while you're brushing your teeth, if you focus on the good posture, then you're additionally strengthening in addition to the other benefits of standing, again, with blood flow and circulation.
That actually sort of reminded me, is that one of those, I know it's really important whenever I go to an exercise class, is that it's not being able to do the exercise, it's being able to do the exercise properly so that you'll make sure you're in the right position to do it, isn't it?
Yeah, quality is so important. And one thing that I preach to all of my clients is quality over quantity. If you can only do 5 total repetitions of an exercise with good quality, then just do 5 instead of 10 or 15 or 20. Your brain, all of our brains, remember and they replicate what we do more of. So if I were to give you, we'll just go back to that marching exercise that I did in the very beginning. Let's say I gave you that exercise, but if you did 30 total, including rest breaks, but 20 of them were not good quality, your brain thinks, since you did more of the bad quality, your brain thinks that's right. So it's going to keep doing that. You're training your brain to do the wrong movement. Wow. So instead of continuing, it's so much better just stop, rest, try to do a few more. But as soon as you feel like, okay, yeah, every repetition is just not good quality, stop. So you want more of your repetitions to be good quality than bad quality. So it's a lot of people, we all grow up 10 times 3 sets for each of the exercises, or you're thought the more you do, the better. But when you have a diagnosis like the ones that we're talking about, quality is so much more important than quantity, even if you're only doing 5 repetitions. And that's hard for a lot of people to wrap their mind around because you associate maybe just 5 with not feeling successful, like you didn't do what you were supposed to do, compared to if you did 30 or even 15 or 20. So yes, quality is important because of your brain, because you're training your brain what you want it to continue doing. And if it's the wrong thing, you're going to be falling more or tripping or getting pain in certain joints or muscle groups.
And I suppose that takes us on to that word, neuroplasticity. See, I knew I wouldn't be able to say it. Neuroplasticity. Is that it?
Yes. Yep.
Which is what you've spoken about. But I was really interested to if you could just expand a bit further on that, because I'm sure people have seen it written and actually how important that is to your exercise.
Yeah. So neuroplasticity is the reason that people with MS, as well as other diagnoses, actually can improve their strength, their balance, their walking. And if you've never heard this concept before, it likely sounds too good to be true. But research has shown in many, many different studies how neuroplasticity works. And basically, through repetition of movement, your brain is able to either strengthen the neural pathway that's already there, it's just weaker, or find a new pathway. So the one way that I like to demonstrate this is with my arm. So let's say I have a really hard time bending my arm for whatever reason. Well, let me back up. Not whatever reason, for a reason pertaining to my nerves, multiple sclerosis, any type of neural-based disease. So if I have difficulty bending my arm, let's say right now I'm saying, okay, Gretchen, bend your arm, and it's just not working at all. Then what that means is, let's say this is the part of my brain that needs to fire and send a neural pathway down to my elbow. So when I say, okay, bend your arm, this maybe is taking a pathway that looks like this, and it's just not going there. It didn't get there. It didn't work. So if I try for a second time, okay, bend your arm, my brain is going to say, okay, well, that pathway didn't work. Let me try this pathway. And it still didn't work. So I'll say, okay, try again, bend. And maybe I'll do some zigzags or some swirlies. There's a trillion probably different ways to get from point A to point B. So the only way to keep finding new pathways is by repetition of attempting that movement over and over and over again, even if you have no movement. And that is so important. I work with a lot of clients, specifically for the ankle dorsiflexion, the foot drop, and they'll say, well, I can't even lift my ankle. So what's next? Give me a different exercise. But the theory of neuroplasticity is, even if there's no movement, keep trying. Every time you attempt to bend your elbow, your brain is trying to find a pathway to make that happen. So eventually, maybe it's your 15,000th try, your brain might find a pathway that worked. And you bend a little. It's not going to be miraculous. You're not going to bend all the way, but you bend a little. So from there on out, every repetition, your brain is going to use that same pathway. And now you're at the point where it's strengthening that neural pathway because it found one that works. So that's the example of when it doesn't move at all. But the same thing happens even if you do have movement. So even if I say, okay, bend your elbow, and I do bend, but not all the way, and maybe it's really hard and heavy, that means that there is a neural pathway that's working from point A to point B. It's just not very strong. So with every time that you practice that movement, your brain is strengthening that pathway. And I'm demonstrating with my elbow, but that happens to every muscle we have in our body. In order to use a muscle, we have to have the thought of, okay, use that muscle, and then a neural pathway sequence down to that muscle. Or it has to be a reflex. So that's what neuroplasticity is, meaning your brain has the ability to strengthen the pathways that exist or to find a new pathway. But the only way to get that to work is through repetition of doing an exercise with good quality over and over and over and over again, including rest breaks. And a lot of people get hung up because they'll just do as many as they can with poor quality. And then you're training the bad movement, or they'll feel like, well, it's not moving well anyways. It's too hard. Just give me a different exercise. And it feels silly. It can be discouraging, like, okay, I'm trying to bend my elbow and it's just not working. That's going to be very discouraging, but easier said than done. Try to get over that. Remember that neuroplasticity does work. There's tons of research out there, and it's hard because you can't see it happening. You can't feel it happening. You can't hear it happening. You don't know that it's happening. You can't tell that your brain is trying to fire different pathways. You have to trust the process and know that every time that you're attempting to do that, if you picture a brain lighting up in different areas, picture that happening. Like every time, that's what your brain is doing. We just can't see it. So it feels discouraging, like this isn't working, and it's easy to give up too soon. The other thing about neuroplasticity, as much as we know that it does work, there's no timeline. So I have some clients who within a few months notice a difference. Other clients, it's a few years or a year. So it's a long time of staying consistent at doing something. And it's an unknown amount of time. I also have other clients who literally within 2 or 3 days of doing an exercise, they're noticing a big difference. Now, that is not necessarily neuroplasticity. It doesn't work that fast. What is happening there is, so let's say I couldn't bend my elbow much at all, but I keep practicing. And then within 2 or 3 days, I'm noticing, look at this, like, look how much movement I have. What's happening there is you were likely overcompensating with other muscle groups that were maybe inhibiting that movement. But by simply practicing the exact movement that you're trying to do, you're strengthening that neural pathway that hasn't been used in a while. So you're basically waking it up. You're basically saying, hey, brain, this is what I want to use right now. I don't want to overcompensate with different muscle groups. This is the one I'm aiming for. And it's almost as if your brain says, oh, okay, I didn't know you wanted to use that muscle. Sure, let's use that one. So it's different than neuroplasticity. It's more of just wakening of the ones that are there, you just weren't using correctly.
I mean, and that's just must be so encouraging for people to hear, but they need to have someone like you sitting on their shoulder, encouraging them, saying, don't give up.
Yeah. And again, too, going back to a strategy that we talked about earlier, make the exercises as easy as possible. Easy does not mean that you're cheating or taking the easy way out. If it's easier, you can do more repetitions. And as we just talked about, if you can do more repetitions, you're more likely to find that neural pathway or strengthen the neural pathway that does exist. So find the exercises that you need, which is going to be dependent based on your goals, and then stay consistent, keep doing them, find modifications for them, because there might be some days that it's too hard. Also find advancements. You're going to get stronger over time. What's a different position that might be a little bit harder to train it in? And then the final piece, as we talked about, is implement it into your day, so that not only are you strong when you're sitting, but you're strong when you're walking, or you're strong during the exact time that you want to use that strength.
Yeah, because there is a difference between doing an exercise and doing it because you've got to use that muscle for doing something practical, isn't it? What's the difference then with muscle memory? Is that different? That must be different.
Well, muscle memory is when your muscles essentially remember what you've done. If you, let's say you have been up and walking. I just keep using that as an example. It's first on my mind. Let's say you're up and walking, but then you had a fall, and maybe you broke something. Maybe you broke a hip, or maybe you didn't break anything, but you had an injury that made you down and out for a week or so. Like you just couldn't get up and walk. Your body, your muscles, your neural pathways remember how to move, even when you're not actually moving it. It's the same thing as, when was the last time you rode a bike? For a lot of us, probably a very long time, but our body, our muscles, our neural pathways remember how to do it. You might be a little wobbly the first few times you do it, but you remember how to do it. So our bodies have that as well. And that's also really encouraging too, because even if you haven't done something for years, if you haven't climbed stairs for years, your body knows what to do. You just have to tell it what to do by focusing on the muscle groups, because that we should be using. If you don't do that and you're not strengthening in that way, your body's just going to overcompensate with different muscle groups. And that could cause pain. It could cause weird movements. It could cause you to not do the movement that you want to do. So yes, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. But funny enough, I've sort of mixed it into another one that I was thinking when I go to the gym, and I find visualization. Is that visualization is really helpful. So I've got one exercise where I'm like that, and I'm pulling a weight up. Now I shouldn't be using my arm. I should be using it's my back, my shoulder. I should be using to you know what I mean. And I find that if I'm not concentrating, it's my arm, it's my muscle here doing the pulling. It's not my back, and it's my back that I'm meant to be doing it. And I find that really helps if I try to really visualize which muscle group or muscle I'm using makes me do the exercise properly as opposed to cheating.
Yeah, because the first muscles, regardless of what we're doing, the first muscles that are going to fire are the ones that are stronger, even if that's not their role. Like with that exercise, yes, your back should be doing the work, but if your shoulders are stronger, your shoulders are going to say, hey, we'll help out, here, I'll do it for you. I was just working with one of my other missing link members yesterday, and one exercise that I like to give for anyone with knee kissing, like your knees collapse inward, is a seated clamshell. So basically you're sitting, your feet are together, open your knees, close your knees, open your knees, close your knees. So I was having her do this, and I was like, okay, where do you feel it? And skipping ahead a little bit, just so you know, you should feel that in your glutes, in your butt, and your hip muscles. So I asked her, I was like, okay, keep going, go slow. Where do you feel it? And she said, well, I feel it on like the tops of my thighs, a little bit of my hamstrings, like the back of my thighs. And that's where I feel it. I was like, okay, so now I want you to visualize. I want you to think about squeezing your butt, and actually squeeze your butt muscles, your hip muscles as you're opening. So she did that. I was like, okay, now where do you feel it? And she immediately was like, oh, I feel it in my glutes. I immediately, and all it took, it was the same exercise. She didn't change anything about the way that she was doing it, other than thinking of, okay, squeeze my glutes as I open. And when she did that, she was able to feel it in the right area. So visualization is key. I've even had some clients who are very immobile, spend most of their time in a wheelchair. He could stand up and take a few steps, walk around a little bit, but for the most part, he was in a scooter or a wheelchair. And he would tell me that he'd lay in bed, that marching exercise I demonstrated on the floor, laying on my back, lifting. He said he would lay on his back with his legs straight, and he would just envision himself lifting his leg up and down, up and down. No movement was actually happening because he had weakness, but he said he could feel it. Like he could feel his muscles tensing just because he was envisioning it happening. So yes, visualization is so important. And I do it with every exercise because it's important to tell your brain which muscles you want working.
And I also find it really helps when I'm doing some form of exercise, when somebody tells me what should be hurting. I mean, not what should be hurting, but where you should feel it, which is what you were just saying. It makes a real difference because, when you're asked to do an exercise, you don't necessarily know, because the brain is so clever and compensates without you even thinking. As you said, the brain is lazy, isn't it? It goes for the easiest way to accomplish something. And, and it really helps, I think, if someone tells you, if you're looking at exercise, you understand what part of your body should be used as opposed to how you can do it.
Yeah, because if you think of the example that you gave, when you're doing that exercise and you should be using your back, but you're using your shoulder, if you didn't visualize and you were just using your shoulder, then over time, your shoulder is going to be doing so much work because it's taking on the action of what it should do, as well as what your back should be doing. So all while that's happening, your shoulder's overworking, your back is not working at all, and you could get a shoulder injury. And then what happens? If you get a shoulder injury, you can't use your shoulder and you've been using it for all these things. For some people, that means you can't use your cane anymore on that side because it's painful, or it just doesn't, you can't put weight through that arm. So overusing a muscle group, while it may overcompensate and allow you to do the movement, you could still do that exercise. Over time, it can be detrimental to your body and your movement. And it can cause pain and breakdown of the joint. So yes, attempting to use the proper muscle is extremely important. And if you don't know, work with a physiotherapist, work with a personal trainer if they know. So you have resources to help you figure it out. But one thing that I do in all of, for those of you that don't know, I'm on all platforms of social media. And in any time I'm explaining an exercise, I will say, this is where you should feel it. Because if you don't know what muscles to squeeze or to visualize. Yeah. So for every exercise, strengthening, walking, balance, anything, I'll say, this is the muscle you should feel it in. If you don't feel it there, squeeze that muscle, visualize
you're not doing it right.
Yeah,
definitely. Okay, so I'm just conscious of time. So just very quickly, 2 things that we said. One of them was that excuse, I don't have enough time. I can't possibly do the exercise. I'm too busy.
Yes.
And you said you've got a good answer for that.
I do. Yes. So let's see, how many years ago? Well, as I mentioned in the beginning, I've been an MS specialist for 6 years. Back about 6 years ago, research was showing that doing your exercises all at once that's what was best for you. But over the last about 4.5 years or so, pretty quickly after I became an MS specialist, it changed. And there was more research on this area. And now, over the last several years, research is showing that doing your exercises throughout the day is just as effective as doing them all at once, which I think is amazing, because that means that if you don't have 30 minutes to exercise, that's okay. You can exercise 5 minutes in the morning, maybe just one exercise before lunch, a few in the afternoon, a few before dinner. You can separate them throughout the day, and it's just as effective. So it might not feel like your typical workout because you're not doing it all at once, but when you're talking about functional goals and walking better and stair climbing and all these things, it's just as effective. So you can no longer use the excuse of, oh, I don't have time. As we're sitting down right now, as you're listening to this, you could be doing your seated marching, and then an hour later, do it again. Then an hour later, you can do it again. So you can fit it into your day as you're watching TV, as you're scrolling your phone, as you are working. It doesn't have to be all at once. So I think that figuring out the exercises you want to do, and then come up with a plan. If your lifestyle does work better all at once, then great, do it all at once. Research also shows that it just takes 20 minutes of exercise to lower our inflammatory response in our body. So stick to just 20 minutes. Even if you've been doing an hour, it doesn't have to be an hour to be effective, or even 30 minutes, just 20 minutes. So you can either do it all at once or throughout the day, whichever fits your lifestyle better. But not having enough time can no longer be an excuse, because you can do it throughout the day.
Yeah. And I would have thought that actually doing stuff throughout the day is better for your body anyway. It just sounds like it would be better.
My thought is, and I don't know if this is actually true, but I feel like if you do your exercises all at once, your brain is more likely to understand that, like, let's say I do my exercises every morning at 9 a.m. I am more likely to have strength at 9 a.m. than at 3 p.m. So I feel like I would actually rather my clients exercise throughout the day, because then you're waking your brain up multiple times throughout the day. You're basically, if I were to do the marching exercise at 9 a.m. and 12 and 3 and 6 p.m., I'm basically telling my brain, hey, brain, I want to use you now and now and now and now. And I'm more likely to be able to use my marching strength throughout the day versus just in the morning. Again, I don't know if there's any research that proves that, but that's how my mind works. So
maybe we should try and find someone to do the research, and we can all be volunteers.
Yeah.
I'm just mindful of time because we've only got 5 minutes to go. If anybody would like, there is a question there, but if anyone would like to ask a question, then please say so now. So we have one here. How often should I exercise? Every day or just a few days? How many break days should I take per week?
That's a great
I like that,
question.
break days.
Yeah. So I have a few answers. So the first answer is research shows, all my answers are always based on research. So research shows you should ideally exercise 5 to 6 days a week, at least when you have MS. That's a recommendation. So I use that for all diagnoses. So 5 to 6 days a week. Other research says, doesn't really matter how many days, but it's 150 minutes per week. So that's going to be different based on how many days you exercise. So if it's 150 minutes and you're exercising 5 days a week, I believe that breaks down to 30 minutes of exercise 5 days a week. But if you exercise 6 days a week, it can be less than that. If you only exercise 3 days a week, it's more time. So 150 minutes a week is currently what the National MS Society is recommending. But I've also heard that 5 to 6 days a week. The other part of this is how many rest days. I always say at least one, if not two, break days. So often I will have clients that are seeing progress and then eventually they plateau and they'll come into me and they'll say, I don't know what's happening. I was doing so great. I've plateaued. I'm not getting any better. What's going on? And the first question I ask them is, okay, well, how many days a week are you exercising? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say 7 days. I have these big goals. I'm exercising every day. And my tip to them is to take at least one day where you don't do them, maybe even 2 days. And for the people who are exercising 7 days a week, it feels so foreign to them. They're like, what? But then I won't see progress. And that feels weird. I need to be working in overdrive to work towards my goals. But as soon as you take a break, you'll overcome that plateau usually, because your body grows, your muscles grow on the rest days. So your body needs rest. It is not meant to do exercises 7 days a week.
Definitely. And actually, one of the last things that we spoke about was accountability as to how you feel, or what's the best way to motivate you to stay on track with your exercises.
Yeah, so this is going to be a little bit different for everyone, but one thing that I find is almost unanimous is accountability in some way, shape, or form can be helpful in having you stay consistent with your program that you've set. And accountability can look different for everyone. Accountability for me is posting a video of one of the moves that I did for my workout in the morning on social media. For other people, that seems so daunting and scary. That's never something they're going to do, but they would text a friend and say, hey, this is what I'm going to do this week. And then you text them every day saying, okay, I'm done. I did it. Or you're in a Facebook group or some type of support group, and maybe you exercise along with other people, but including other people in some way, shape, or form as a form of accountability can be so, so helpful. If you aren't that type of person, you just want to do it on your own, track what you're doing, write it down, use fun colors as you're tracking it down, make it a fun time, use stickers if you want to, but write down what you're doing so that it holds you accountable, because all this information we talked about today is great, but if you don't stay consistent, it's not going to make a difference. So finding some form of accountability that feels good to you, even if it means stepping out of your comfort zone. Maybe you haven't ever texted someone saying, or emailed someone saying, okay, I'm going to exercise and this is what I'm going to do, and then followed through with it. Or maybe you've never posted in a Facebook group or on social media, but you do it. It might feel uncomfortable, but it can, in an extreme way, help with accountability and staying on track.
And also, I think even if you don't manage to do what you said, the very fact you've actually done something towards it, nobody can take that away from you.
Right, absolutely. And this could be anything, not just exercise. I go through phases of life where I'm just pressing the snooze button all the time. And so I'll set a goal of, okay, I'm going to be up by, no matter what, I'm going to be up by 6 a.m. or 5:30. I went through a phase where it was 5:30 a.m. And so I would post on social media in the morning and I'd put a timestamp on it so people could see. No one knew this goal of mine. Like, no one knew why I was doing it. I kept it to myself, but I would put the timestamp. And to me, I was like, okay, look, I'm up. I was up by 6 a.m. So, if no matter what you're doing, if it's small goals, even if you only did it one day that week, amazing. baby steps. You don't have to just jump from no exercise to 150 minutes a week. Tiny baby steps along the way.
But just get moving in whatever shape or form. It doesn't necessarily mean walking, but it's to get your body moving and doing things.
And do things you enjoy. If you're a class person, go to a swim class, a class at the gym, a yoga class, classes online. There's so many different types of YouTube exercise classes. Do something that you enjoy, because if you don't enjoy it, you're probably not going to stick to it. So there's so many different options out there.
And also the other thing from exercise, not only is the physical, well, it is the endorphins that you get and how you feel so much better. You're pleased with yourself for doing it. You feel like you can give yourself a pat, and all of that is just, you can't put a price on that type of, you can't go and buy that.
Right, absolutely. And it's tricky because at first it's uncomfortable and our brain doesn't want us to do anything uncomfortable. It wants us to stay in our comfort zone. So anything that's going to require you to work hard and to maybe sweat a little bit or just use muscles that are really weak and it's hard to do the movements, it's going to feel uncomfortable. But at the end, you're going to get those endorphins and you'll feel better. So it does require pushing through that to reap the benefits of the endorphins and the stronger muscles.
Absolutely. Well, I think on that note, on that positive note, we will end up, and hopefully people will have included, if you believe in New Year's resolutions, to up their exercise and all of those things. But exercise is for life, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anyway, thank you very much, Gretchen. Really lovely to see you. And thank you very much, everybody that joined us.
Yes, thank you for having me, and thanks for joining, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.